Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Swartwood here. Tonight, I am joined by an award-winning author who has published four works of fiction, including three novels and one short story collection. His latest project is publishing one short story every week for the entire year. He's also had books published in, or stories published in the New Yorker and other esteemed places, such as my Fiction anthology, which we're going to get into. That's right, it's your favorite writer of mine, Nick Arvin. Nick, how the heck are you?
I'm good. Good to see you, Robert.
Yeah, I do you remember last time we saw each other?
I mean, we met one time in person in Pennsylvania, and I can't even remember. I don't remember now why I was out there. And we met in like a diner out in the middle of nowhere or something. Do you remember what
Yeah,
was
you
going on?
were up in you were for some reason at Penn State, one of the Penn State satellite
Oh,
schools,
yeah.
and I believe it was in Reading. And what's funny is because I had pulled down you know, especially when we had moved, I had to get rid of a lot of books, but I did save your collection here. And I was just paging through it because, and we talked a little bit in the green room. This came out in 2003, and there was a time in publishing where short story collections were much more, uh, you know, they were much more widely available because I guess maybe readers liked short stories. I guess nowadays maybe not so much, or if they do like short stories, it's more just online or whatever else. But you were one of those writers who I'm assuming had a two-book deal where it was a collection and then a novel. And this is your collection in the Electric Eden. I had really cool packaging for anybody who can see. It was a nice card stock. And I was thinking about it. I'm like, why did I end up picking up this? I mean, it has a really cool thumb. But I remember you had a Stuart Onan blurb, and he basically name drops T.C. Boyle in here, and I love T.C. Boyle's work, so I'm like, okay, and I read your book, and I really like this, and but anyway, as I was paging through it, you actually signed it because and so we met February 14th, 2017, Reading, PA. You signed it and you dated it and you
Yeah,
actually put a thing in there,
awesome.
which is actually kind of nice because I'll be honest with you, sometimes when I sign things, I just sign them. I don't put the dates really or where it's at.
Yeah.
So that's when we met. Remember, we met at a diner, we had breakfast and kind of talk shop, and now we're talking again. Coming up, what? Well, 8 years later? No, it's 9 years later. Yeah,
Yeah, nine
I
years
can't do
later.
math in my head.
Yeah, it's funny. The two book deal thing was definitely a thing back then. The idea was that an author would put out a book of stories. You maybe you wouldn't make much money on that, but it would establish a reputation, and then you bring out the novel. And my agent, when we were selling that book, his advice was if you can do it as a one book deal, you should. And because he had just recently represented Jhumpa Lahiri with her first book, which was a book of stories called Interpreter of Maladies, which went crazy. And I'm not sure if she was kind of trapped into the two book deal structure on that or not. But coming out of that, my agent felt like you're better off not being in a two book deal. So we had two offers for that book. One was a two book deal offer, and the other was just for the book of stories. And so we went with the one book deal, which came out through Penguin, and and then it turned into a big. It became very difficult to sell the next book. Actually, Articles of War was my first novel, and the editor at Penguin said that she really liked it. She wanted to buy it, but the editorial committee or editor in chief shot it down because they had another book that was in some way similar to the one I was trying to sell them. And then my agent shopped Articles of War around all over the place, and finally sold it. But it was kind of a close thing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, publishing is a terrible business. I always tell people that it is the only reason as a writer you stay in publishing is because you just love telling stories and love writing because the business is completely awful. But yeah, I mean, just stuff like that comes down. What is interesting too about this is from what I can tell, you only had one. at least previously published story in this collection, and it was in a, it was in a well-known literary journal, but oftentimes, it's like for Ben Laurie when he was trying to shop around his short story collection, the only way he could get it published was if he could get a story in the New Yorker. And so that became a whole thing where all of a sudden, and you did eventually have a story in the New Yorker, but not at this time, where sometimes it's like, well, it's either, you have to have a story in the Paris Review, New Yorker, Harper's, just some type of big magazine that I guess maybe they can then take to the editorial, to the marketing team to say like, oh, look at this. Like that really matters. I guess. So, but I
Yeah.
mean, it does for them. I want to go back to the author you mentioned too, which I'm not going to say her name because I'm going to butcher it. But yeah, she's great. Did you read her most recent collection, the Roman stories?
Oh, Jumbo Lahiri. Um,
Yeah.
I have not. I've read some of those stories. I haven't read the collection. I've read some of the stories, like in the New Yorker and as they came out. But she's a
So
great writer.
yeah, but she does this thing where I guess she's like living in Italy now. So like
Yeah,
she writes the stories in Italian and then
yeah,
translates them herself into English. And it's
yeah,
it's it's wild, right? It's like, well, I don't know. Like why you would do that, I guess.
yeah. There's a Norwegian. I think it's Norwegian writer, and I've reached that age where I can't remember names. Anyway, she writes these fantastically weird stories, and she translates them herself from it's either Norwegian or Swedish into English. So which I, the ability to do that, I think is amazing. My language skills are terrible outside of English.
Yeah. So, I had asked you before in the green room if I thought we had done a podcast years ago, and I guess we had not. So maybe we will. Hmm. Usually, what with writers, I really like to kind of dig down and kind of like how they got into writing and stuff like that. Maybe we'll do that more next year when you have the new novel come out because I want to focus more of the short story angle of everything because this was kind of the project you're doing now, an insane project to like
It is
to
insane.
to basically commit yourself to doing this, and I definitely want to talk about this. But yes, we had met that at one time at the diner in Reading, Pennsylvania. But the very first time I had any communication with you, obviously, and I'm not gonna. We talked a bit about this anthology that I put together, hint fiction and stories, or an anthology and stories. It's been so long. An anthology of stories in 25 words or fewer. Now, when I sold this collection to the publisher, one of the stipulations was they wanted us to find more quote unquote famous, more established writers to include in the book because we knew it was going to be a big and again goes back to that marketing thing. They want to make sure that they have something that they could try to sell to. So I had reached out to some big name authors, but I also reached out to other authors whose works I had read and really liked. And I remember I had emailed you, obviously out of the blue, inviting you to this anthology. And I had to look, I had to search. I should have saved it here. I could read it. But like your email essentially was like, why are you thinking of me for this project? Do you remember that? You were very much like, oh, this is very nice of you. But like, why would you reach out to me for this?
That's funny. Um, yeah, well, and it's interesting, like, when we were talking before we came on, I thought it was really interesting the story of how you picked up in the Electric Eden, because you said that the blurb from Stuart and Ann uh, was what caught your eye,
Well, I
and
mean, the packaging again is really, really cool on this. I don't think
yeah,
people can really, just to see it here, but to actually hold it, it's not a, usually books go with like a certain standard dimensions. This is a little bit more narrow, as opposed to, well, you know
yeah,
what?
the aspect ratio is a little different.
So like here's kind of like your current book. It's the same height, but it's also not as wide.
Yeah,
So again, it feels a little bit more narrow. And I don't know, again, it was just, a book. And you know, I
yeah,
will say, that it was also a remainder. There is the black thing there. So I probably saw it at, wherever it was and picked it up for a couple bucks. Okay.
Yeah.
Just,
Well,
full transparency. But yeah, I remember reading it. I think I was subbing at the time because I remember, kind of like when I was subbing, just, taking a book along with me and reading. And yeah, I really liked it. And then I think like not long after you had a story in the New Yorker, which I really, really liked. I only remember it was like a guy. I remember it was like a guy got in a car and was just driving at one point and he smashes something. I don't know. I forget what it was, but it was really well done and it stuck with me. And yeah, so I reached out to you and you were very kind, but you were also very much like, it was like, wait, what? Why am I being invited to this? And then do you remember the story you wrote? I just read it again.
yeah. Well, it would
Because it
take you
has been a
about
while.
15 seconds to read it, right? I love the
Uh,
premise of the hint fiction anthology that you can write as that the stories are 25 words or
Yeah,
fewer.
so it was I mean it was inspired by the Ernest Hemingway supposed, I mean no one has really proved it was him, but the six-word story for sale baby shoes never born. I had done this essay which was kind of a tongue-in-cheek essay on, well, at the time I had seen another writer basically say that he wanted to like name something. There was a particular thing and he didn't think that had a name, so he wanted to give it a name. So in the future, if it catches on or if anybody gives it a name, he'll say like, "No, I did it first." And so I very facetiously did this idea about like, oh, these really, really, really short stories because there's flash fiction, there's sudden fiction, all these other things, and like, well, these really, really short stories like like the six-word story, like we should call them like hint fiction because we're hinting at like a larger story. And again, arbitrarily I'm like, because at the time there was also like 100-word stories, 50-word stories, so just naturally I'm like, these stories are like 25 words or fewer. Again, just completely as a joke. And then to try to promote it or whatever, going back to Stuart and Nan, I knew Stuart and Nan and I had asked him, I said, hey, if I do a little, this little like short story contest on my website. Like, would you be the judge? And he's
Yeah,
like, sure. Because I told him, I said, listen, I'll narrow down the stories. You only have to read like, a couple hundred words probably. It's not going to be a lot. And he's like, yeah, sure, it's fine. And then including his name, somehow it got picked up by, and they don't really have this nowadays. I mean, I follow like the Hollywood Reporter, Deadline, like all these like TV news trade journals. They don't really have that anymore for books. I mean, I guess there are certain things, but there used to be a thing called Galley Cat, which really
mm,
followed just publishing and when there was
yeah,
different things, and that got picked up. That Stuart Onan was the judge, and then all of a sudden, slews of stories started raining in, and then an editor at W. Norton reached out to
yeah,
me. She emails me, copies my agent, and was like, I think this is really cool. We should talk about blah, blah, blah. And I remember emailing with my agent. He was like, I don't get what she's asking here. She wants you to write a story. I'm like, no, she wants me to edit an anthology
right,
of these stories. So the whole thing was just like crazy. Like we never could have taken that idea and shopped it around. I don't think. Like it was just one of those like weird flukes of the publishing industry. And yeah,
yeah. That's a great story. Yeah, the piece I wrote for you for that was called Knock Knock Joke. I remember that. I could not recite it.
which I kind of pushed back on a little bit
Yeah,
because it was a thing where again, this was so brand new. No one had ever really done anything like this before. So in the back of my head, I kind of felt this weird pressure that essentially this anthology was going to establish whatever quote unquote hint fiction was. So and I realized that we have the Hemingway six-word story, but these types of stories, the title really plays into the actual story itself. It is almost part of the story itself.
hmm,
I mean, obviously titles typically do play into the story, but even more so here. And there had been a few douchebags online who had been really criticizing this whole hint fiction idea. And one of them in particular was saying like, oh, they're just these little jokes or whatever else. So I remember when I got your thing, it's like
yeah,
hint hint joke. And I'm like, or it was Knock Knock Joke, and I'm like, I really don't want to kind of play up this idea that these are jokes, yeah, it works out really well. Do you remember anything about the story? Because I'm sure this is the first time you've been thinking about this in years.
It is, yeah. You know, well, what I remember most of all is that it's the most like in a way the most awesome response I've ever had. Like for 25 words, like on a per word basis, absolutely the most awesome response I've ever gotten to a story because um, there was someone who made a short film based on it. There were people who would use the anthology as the basis. You remember this
There was an
for
art show, yeah,
art
in
contest,
Columbia, Missouri. They had
yeah,
they decided to do this art show, and
right.
people had basically made art inspired by the stories. And they actually had flown me out there. I gave a talk about it. I made sure to take pictures of each of the ones and send to the artists. Yeah, I mean, there
Yeah.
was a lot of really cool things. I mean, it was I was on NPR's with Scott Simon, and like NPR had reviewed it, and it was like actually in the New Yorker reviewed it. Surprisingly enough, like Publishers Weekly and Kirkus and stuff, no one ever reviewed it there, but
Mm,
it did get a lot of really great press. So more so than probably what we ever imagined it would. So it was a really fun book. It came out in November. Honestly, the publisher probably should have like anticipated more that these were going to be like a nice kind of gift, because I think that first printing sold out really fast. And by the time they had another printing out, it was like past the holidays, and
oh,
yeah, it
that's too
was what it
bad. Yeah.
was.
Yeah, but yeah, it was, and I also remember there was at least one class that incorporated into like graphic design, and so there was I can still see the image of a cover for for Knock Knock Joke that one of the students designed, and just I don't remember all the feedback, but there was a lot of feedback that came to me from that little just tiny bit of fiction. It was really cool.
Yeah. Do you remember how long? I mean, did you have other ideas at the time? Because it's not, I mean, initially, I think a lot of people think like, oh, a 25-word story, that's easy. But it's really not. I mean, not if you decide that you want to write a very effective, moving story, which you can do in 25 words or fewer. But and I remember some writers telling me like it was like, that was probably one of the hardest things they had ever had to do was to write a story that, I mean, do you remember and like how long it took you? Because like for me, usually with short stories, I kind of have fallen into that Walter Mosley thing where I'll just read through it, make some changes here and there, read through it again, make some changes here and there, read through it again. And then when I get to a place where I'm not making any changes anymore, it's done.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um, with a 25-word story, I mean, it's almost like poetry. I mean, it is in a way
yeah.
like poetry. Every single word, I mean, the shorter you go, every single word really matters. I mean, it's one thing in like a 300-page novel, you can have little stumbles and little, you know, whatever here and
Digressions.
there.
Yeah.
But when you're down to like 1,000 words, 525, I mean, it is like every word is precious. Do you remember like just writing that story, how long that took to draft, if you came up with other ideas?
Yeah, I remember it really puzzled me for a while. I don't remember how long. This was a while ago now, but it was definitely a challenge. And it starts out in a knock knock joke structure, and I
Well, here,
remember.
I'll read it.
Okay, yeah,
Just
I
for
would read it
for for
myself.
uh
Unfortunately, I
yeah,
didn't
we will.
think to have it here. I should have.
Yeah, so the title, and actually, so also, okay, so I think there was 125 stories in here, 150, I think 125. Structure wise, I didn't just want it to be a free for all. So what happened was I broke the stories down, and there's three different sections. So there is, and essentially you have to ask yourself, like, what are most stories about? And so the first section was part one, life and death, part two, love and hate, and part three, this and that for the more miscellaneous stuff. Your story fell into love and hate, and it was the lead story. And this was one of
Mm,
those things where, and we could spend a lot of time on this, but like I spent a lot of time trying to make sure these stories were like, again, not like willy-nilly, like they were specifically in a certain structure, so that when you read one story, sometimes it would lead you into the next story by a completely different author, completely different story, but somehow maybe had the same feel or whatever else. And so your story was the very first story in this section, the love and hate. Again, it was called Knock Knock Joke by Nick Arvin. My father, standing at the sink with white sleeves rolled, says, knock knock. I say, who's there? She loves. She loves who? He says, exactly.
That's right. I'm like, oh yeah, that was pretty good. I
It
had
it
forgotten
was it
about
was it was
that.
excellent. I'll be honest with you. And even looking at it now, just the white sleeves rolled. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like just those little things.
yeah.
The
Kind
yeah.
of see him with that. Yeah, yeah, that was I remember that I liked using the knock knock joke structure because like it gave the reader like as soon as you start that, it gives them they have an anticipation that you can then like upset, right? So when it you say knock knock, who's there, and then he says like it just it allows you to to upset the reader's expectations, which is one of the things I love trying to do in a piece of writing, and I like that that structure allowed me to do that in such a short number of words.
Yeah. Well, in retrospect, and I think the more I thought about it, it did work for the title, Knock Knock Joke, because it does set up that expectation that like, oh, it's a knock knock joke, but like it's really not. And yeah, no, it was definitely a story. Um, yeah, it was excellent. And in fact, since we were talking about this, we're gonna get to you shortly. Don't worry. But I don't think I ever told this story publicly, but initially the publisher they offered $10,000. Well, actually, they offered initially 7,500 for it, and my agent was able to get them up to 10,000. It was like, okay, great. And I had always wanted to pay the contributors something, you know what I mean? Like and I also wanted to make sure, because I knew there was going to be so many contributors to do it in a way where it was going to be more of a one-time fee thing. I wasn't have to like, do royalties because this book still, you know, I still get royalty checks, but honestly, they're like $30, for like per whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and so my agent was kind of like, you know what? These are really short stories. Just tell them that like they'll get a copy or two or whatever else. And I was like,
Mm.
all right. Because again, I was so young. I was so like, new at this. So I was like, okay. And for whatever reason, I don't know why. I must have emailed or I had called and he was calling me back one morning. My agent calls me. And I think like he was on his way into the office and he was like returning calls or whatever else. And so he wakes me up and I'm like, hello. And I'm talking to him. I forget what we were talking about, but I go into my office, turn on the computer, and this email pops up from Peter Straub, who initially I had reached out to. Again, see, because he had asked, well, what's the payment? And I told him, like, well, it's these, it's just these short stories, so you're gonna do a copy. And he didn't like eviscerate me, but he was basically like, whoops. He was like, no. He's like, I'm not, it's
Yeah.
ridiculous that you would blah blah blah, and like he kind of like laid into me. And I'm like, I'm getting this email as I'm on the phone with my agent, and I'm like, Peter Straub just emailed me all this stuff. And he's like, well, let me go talk to some people here at the agency and blah blah blah. Because again, like he had never, I think, like had represent anybody who had done really an anthology before. So basically, long story short, the way it's supposed to be done, which when we ended up doing it, is half of the advance really goes to help pay the contributors. So, and we ended up working it away. So it was like, I think every contributor got like $25 each, which
Mhm.
$25. But again, these were also small stories, which essentially worked out to like a dollar, per
Forward's pretty
word.
good.
Some is even more because some stories were even shorter than 25. But yeah, I mean, again, everybody was happy. I ended up, emailing Peter, and Peter did contribute a story. So, rest in peace, Peter. But yeah, that was one of those like early morning emails you see where like, a writer you've read for
Yeah.
years and have admired is like yelling at you. And it was like, oh man. So anyway, yeah, so let's get into, okay, so you have in the Electric Eden, then you do a short story collection, you do a novel. You've done a couple novels. Your most recent novel was Mad Boy, which we're going to talk a little bit at the end because next year you have, I guess, a kind of a follow up to this. And again, I'd love to have you back to really discuss more about just the novel aspect. Um, but in terms of short stories, you had the short story collection. In the interim between all that time, you had also been publishing other short stories. Obviously, you had a story in the New Yorker and elsewhere. And now, 2026, you've decided to start a Substack to publish a story a week. Why? What is going through your head?
because I'm crazy. Um, it came out of and I have written. I First of all, I love short stories. I love writing short stories. They're hard to publish. I after In the Electric Eden came out, and I want to say if anyone's interested in it, it went out of print, but it's been picked up by a small press, Powerhouse, that has put it back into print. And they couldn't just copy that cover, but they took some of the elements from it. So I love their cover too. Um, and so, since In the Electric Eden came out, I've been working on short stories off and on, and I've published in the New Yorker. I've published, have over the years had three different stories in Ploughshares. I've had a story in McSweeney's, Missouri Review, other places like that. But it's really hard, even with those kinds of publications attached. It's hard to get anyone's interest in publishing a book of stories anymore. Um,
So did
and
you though try to put together another collection based on all those other short stories?
I have uh, I have done that. It got a rejection. My agent was like from the outset was like, "This is going to be hard to sell." And I guess like I don't want to get into that too
Sure.
much, but it it kind of got put back in the drawer. And I'd like it. I think someday I will have another book of stories come out, and it'll have those stories and hopefully some new ones. I like ultimately I feel like I haven't managed to put together a full book of stories that I'm really happy with. Is kind of what it boils down to.
I'm
Um,
sorry. And Nick, going back to this, when you put together this short story collection, did you have other stories that did not make the cut? Like basically what went into the idea of this particular short story collection?
yeah, yeah. I wrote. I feel like I was so young when I was writing that. Like I said, it came out in 2003. I wrote most of that book when I was at the Iowa Writers Workshop doing my MFA there, and I have stories that did not get into there. But my concept with that book is when, and this is an aspect of my life that we haven't even touched on yet, is I'm an engineer also. Like that's my day job, and I had before I went to the Iowa Writers Workshop, I had worked as an engineer at Ford. And so the stories that went into In the Electric Eden all have some touchstone in technology or an engineer or a person who works in technology, and that kind of links all those stories together. And a lot of my stories since then have kind of maintained like my most of my novels have been historical fiction, with one exception, and most of my short stories have kind of touched on technology and engineers and things like that. Um, in terms of this, at least the stuff that I've been publishing in journals and wherever. Um, so I just I've loved writing stories. I've continued to write them, um, but and you get a story into Ploughshares, and it's great, but you get you know just no feedback on it, right? It goes into a print journal that goes out to some limited number of readers, and even if your friends, even your friends are probably not going to subscribe to Ploughshares for the year to get that journal. So you end up sending them a PDF or something, and I've found that a little dispiriting. And don't get me wrong, like I would love to get another story into Ploughshares or McSweeney's or anywhere else. But
I feel like the reality is most literary journals are just read by other writers who want to submit to that journal, if that.
yeah, I mean, and that's unfortunately probably mostly true, uh, and they put, I'm every time I do pick up a Ploughshares or McSweeney's or Missouri Review or whatever, like I'm really impressed by the quality. Like there are great short stories being written. but they're not finding much of an audience anymore. And it's perplexing, right? Because we're in an age of short attention spans, and you would think that short stories would appeal to people right now. Um, so part of what I'm thinking in terms of like starting to put out a story a week for a year is let's try something different, right? Let's try getting those stories out to people in a different way. And I don't know if this is it or not, but I'm hoping it might find some readers. And I am finding that you know pushing these stories out through a Substack, it's getting more feedback on those stories than I get on stuff that's published in a literary journal. Um,
Yeah.
the what really pulled me into this path though was just as an author, as there's more and more of an expectation that you kind of have a platform or whatever you want to call it, that you're kind of bringing some readers to the work. And so I as when I sold the book that's going to come out next year, I sold it in the summer of last year. I started thinking about a mailing list and like how am I going to bring readers to this book. And there are a lot of authors who are out there putting out Substacks and have a newsletter that goes out once a month or whatever it might be, and they talk about writing tips or they talk about politics or what's going on in their life. And so I thought about doing that. And the problem is like I just don't enjoy writing about any of those things very much. And whenever I sit down and have time to write, what I want to write is fiction. And so I began thinking, well, why not try putting out fiction? And uh, the the advice you get if you're looking at putting out a Substack or something like that is that you should try to reach your readers once a week. So I said, well, why not try and push out a story once a week? So I started experimenting, without announcing a project, just experimenting with can I write a story in a week? And so I spent the last 2-3 months of last year um, kind of going through that exercise, and which had the benefit um, of allowing me to build up a folder of some rough drafts to pull from, and but also I guess one of the things that was surprising to me as I started doing that was um, I've been doing this long enough. I actually remember when I was a really young writer trying to write a story a month. I guess spent a year doing that, and it felt like a real challenge. And I find that it comes easier now. And I think I've I've spent about 30 years writing fiction. It's just you learn to see some of the obstacles ahead of time. You just learn to see where the false paths, and I also find that the endings are still really hard. And so,
Yeah.
like ideas are pretty easy, and pushing that idea from a beginning to a middle is pretty easy, and then I end up sitting there for a while trying to figure out an ending. But so it's also a challenge myself to like try some different things and force myself to just push through and experiment with some horror stories and some love stories and some things I would probably never write if I weren't doing something crazy like this.
Yeah. So far you've published four stories. Okay, so the idea is not like, next week you have a story due and you write a story. You do have stories that you've already written. Are they complete or are they drafts of stories that then you might dip back into?
There, yeah, I have a folder of drafts. I call them drafts, and then I'll pull. And I'm finding myself, and like I'm still trying to figure out what the rhythm of this is exactly. At the moment, I would say, two different stories that I'm kind of working on in draft form, and then a third story that I'm planning to put out on Tuesday that I'm also thinking about and making a couple, revisions to. But that one, I'm like pulling out of the draft folder. I knew it was pretty good shape, and so but I'm also, I'm tweaking the title and doing some things like that. And meanwhile, at the same time, thinking about these other two stories and pushing those through. So I'm a little surprised actually by how much my brain is like scattering around and working on multiple things at one time, because that's not usually how I work. Usually I pick up one thing and just work on it. But these pieces are shorter than like my typical short story in the past would be 20 pages, and these stories are working out to more like 5 pages or less. And
Yeah, flash fiction, which goes back to, I think, to the online ADHD culture where you want to keep a story within a certain much. I mean, like I'm here looking at your Substack. Even on your Substack, they oftentimes also give like how many minutes the read should typically take. And the very first story, actually, I think looks to be the longest story so far that you've published. That says it's about a 9 minute read. The next story was a 3 minute read, then a 6 minute read. So and again, I mean, obviously the hint fiction story aside, you do typically, I guess in the past, have published much longer stories. So did you just, was it a conscious thing, an unconscious thing that you knew that these would be more, quote unquote, flash fiction pieces?
yeah, it evolved out of starting to experiment with, you know, what can you write in a week? And especially given the constraints of, I still have a day job. So um, I'm, I'm fitting this in around that. And those that, like that 6 or 9 minute read, it's interesting in my mind. There's a distinction, I guess, between that I'm evolving in my mind as I'm working on these stories. A distinction between the pieces that I feel like have a full arc of some kind, and a piece that to me is more of a flash piece that is just capturing a moment or a feeling or something really more distilled. So like that piece that you mentioned, that's two like a 2 minute read, is more of that kind of flash piece where it's very brief and just kind of capturing a moment. Whereas like the 9 minute piece or the 6 minute piece too have an arc to them, and the character kind of changes over time and has a little more of a traditional story structure. And I love that I am able to do that within that kind of shorter length. And it's the process is forcing me to think about and figure out how to do that within those shorter word counts. And it's fun so far. It's been like, I think by the end of the year I'm going to be losing my mind and ready for it to be over. But so far, like, I've really enjoyed the way it's forcing me to stretch myself and do something new. And again, like, I've been doing it for like 30 years, and it's I love that this is like a way to make myself do something different and try to try to work those muscles in a different way.
So when you're writing a short story, and I guess maybe that you said that has kind of changed over the course of the 20, 30 years. I mean, do you try to just sit down and then just write it out, or are you going like a scene, you'll work on a scene and then come back to it and then just kind of play with it that way? Or do you try to just, I mean, I don't even know if you're like consider a quote unquote fast writer, but like writing a 20-page story, have you ever written at least the first draft of an entire 15, 20-page story, in one go? Or is it kind of you just, again, you might do a scene and then come back to it and kind of build on there?
Yeah. Yeah, very much. The stories I've written in the past, it's always been a very slow process. A lot of them I work on for years, not continuously, but coming back to that story again and again over years. And a lot of times they would change completely over time as I would get a draft down and then come back to it and decide it kind of sucks. except for, this part here, and pull that out and rewrite around that. Um, Usually they would start with a scene or some kind of idea of a conflict or an image or something that was interesting to me, and then just start trying to expand outward from that. Um, and refining it. A lot of times, there's an element of that process of just of reading through it and tweaking it as you go along. But uh, almost the only time I can think of a story, there's a story in the Electric Eden that I remember kind of came to me, and I was able to plot it out in my head during a long drive from, I think, Iowa to Chicago. Um, but that's the only time that it ever happened to me. Otherwise, stories came very slowly with, start with a scene here, and then you struggle for a while to figure out how it began and figure out where it goes and what the ending is. And so this is it forces the story to be very refined in terms of what it's about. It makes you realize that even like a kind of traditional 20-page short story is kind of capacious and has volume in terms of the ability to stretch out, and it goes back to what we were talking about with the hint fiction. Like every word just counts more, and so trying to be very, very focused in terms of where that story's going, and putting in just enough to give you some sense of character and development. And then, I find in the drafts I'm kind of working on now that'll be coming out probably in a month or two. I find myself getting into weirder and weirder concepts. So that's stuff that's sort of more in the realm of magical realism or horror or things like that. So one of the things I'm excited about with this is just kind of see where it goes and what kind of stories I end up writing by the end of it, because I have no idea where what that 50-second story will be.
Yeah. Well, like with any collection, obviously you want to start with probably, one of your more stronger pieces, something that's really going to set the tone of that collection. Was it the same thought process with this, where a collection of sticks was the very first story you decided to put? I mean, I guess why did you decide story one was going to be a collection of sticks? And maybe kind of tell people a little bit like what that story is about.
Yeah. Yeah, so the first story that came out in week one of 2026, a collection of sticks. It's about it's from the point of view of a son of a man who has collected sticks his whole life, and he'll collect a stick like each time. He has, I think, five children in the story. He went out in front of the hospital and collected a stick every time one of his children was born. But he also would collect sticks just when he's walking around, and that kind of has an eye for sticks that look interesting and have a certain innate appeal in some way. And so over time, he's built up this large collection of sticks. And the story's kind of about, what does that collection mean? And he remarries, and the sticks get put away, and then eventually they end up getting pulled out again. And how did they're just sticks, but they end up having this emotional meaning and weight for people. And so the story is kind of about how do objects take on these meanings. Um, and it started. It's literally the first story that I wrote when I was thinking about this project and like trying to figure out how I could write a story in a week. And so I just sat down and said, okay, I'm going to try and write a story in a week. And the first idea for a story that came to my mind was to kind of do something with a collection of sticks, because my wife Erin has a collection of sticks, and they're not. It's not a vast collection of sticks like in the story, but it's a vase full of sticks that she's collected over the years that are just interesting looking in some way. And I've always loved her collection of sticks. Like they're very appealing to look at, and so I I just started thinking about that and how to expand on it. And so that, I mean, that really was the main reason it ended up being the first story in the launch of this. Was because it was the first one that I wrote. But I do think, I felt it was a good, strong story in terms of it has that kind of arc. It has explores some meaning, and it also, the stories over the course of the year will be a kind of a collection of sticks too, right? Um, and there'll be some oddballs and there'll be some oddly formed sticks, and but hopefully as a whole it'll be pretty interesting to look at. And I want to mention that my wife, Erin Shepke, is she's an artist and an illustrator, and so she's been providing photo illustrations for the stories. And I'm not sure if she'll be able to do it for every single story, but I think for most of them. And I really love the photos that are accompanying these stories.
That was going to go to my next question because yes, so far every story has some type of art piece connected to it. So okay, so those were via your wife. For a collection of sticks, that art is that her collection of sticks?
That is
Like
her
what?
collection of sticks. Yeah, she took them out of a
Okay.
vase and arranged them and took a photo. Yeah, that's the originating collection of sticks right there.
So how much editing are you doing? Like, are you having other writer friends or whoever? I'm assuming you're probably not like bugging your agent with this, but like, like how much editing are you doing when you do these short stories? And has that changed versus the short stories that were in Ploughshares and in New Yorker, where you maybe spent
Mm,
more time with those stories before you felt
yeah,
they were, like ready to go?
yeah. I mean, it's a huge difference. I'm normally, I mean, this is really forcing me to be less precious about my writing. Normally, I would spend hours on hours on hours editing and refining every sentence. And hopefully a person reading my novels would see that. And I think I'm a pretty like my first drafts are pretty good. But I part of me loves that process. But it's slow and can be kind of tedious too. So with this, there's no time for that. And I would also normally, I have some writer friends who would read drafts of things and give me some feedback. And again, there's no time for that here. I read them out loud to Erin, and she gives me some feedback on things that just aren't working, and that's it. Like I'll do it, I'll revise based on that, and be done pretty much. Because a week goes by fast, and if you spend 3 days writing it and another couple days revising, then you're pretty much through the week.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that anticipated my next question about like, do you read these stories aloud? Because I always maintain I feel like good fiction has good rhythm and flow, so it's always good to read that aloud. Because sometimes when you read a story aloud, you might catch things that you're not seeing if you're just reading it, on the page. So, okay, so that is something that you do. You do read them aloud, especially to somebody else. I mean, usually for me, at least personally, I will just be in my office by myself and I'll just kind of read it aloud. But you're actually reading it to somebody else who might be able to catch something that you might not even hear or notice.
Yeah, yeah, that's actually a difference in my process too, because um, I think I don't know if I want to say most writers, but a lot of writers, reading aloud is part of their process. I um, I have rarely done that. I feel like the when I'm reading, I'm reading it on the page, and there are times when I'm struggling with something, and I'll start reading it out loud to try and kind of figure out what's going on with the rhythm that's off. And times I'll read something just as a different way to kind of process it, but um, it's never been like a necessity for me to as a like a necessary step in the process of writing to read it aloud. But I have been reading all of these out loud to Aaron, and I think I mean, it may be a step that I should be incorporating because I think it short circuits a little bit of the revising, endless revising that I would normally be doing. I think I catch a few things a little more quickly reading it aloud.
Yeah. Um, so again, you have no idea like what the 52nd story is going to be right now. You probably don't even know really what the 30th story is going to be, I guess, at this point.
Not a clue.
Does that cause you any type of, I don't want to say necessarily anxiety, but does it cause you any anxiety, that idea that you've kind of committed right now to doing this project? Or is it kind of, like, is it nice to kind of have that pressure, the deadline? Like, are you somebody that works well under a deadline? Because otherwise you can kind of just tinker with the story, tinker with the story, tinker with the story. Whereas opposed to now it's like, no, this has to be done by a certain time. You'll get it out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exactly what you just said. Uh I do, I will revise and revise and revise a story. And as a literary writer, you actually don't have, at least in my experience, you don't have deadlines very often. It's you 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 write a book before you sell it, right? And so and I'm fortunate, to have a day job that pays my bills. So I'm not dependent on turning out books to get a check. And so I do feel like that process can kind of drag out because I don't have a deadline. So um, and the couple of times have had deadlines, I've been pretty happy with um, the the fiction that I've written. I wrote a story. The Rocky Mountain News, unfortunately, is defunct, but years and years ago they did a thing where they had local authors write some short fiction for them, and so they asked me to do it, and had a relatively short deadline for it. And I always really loved the story that came out of that. And I've often thought, well, maybe I would do better if I had more deadlines. So that's yeah, like I said, it's kind of exciting to just be forced to be less precious about the writing. I love working through the sentences and really refining those, but there are a lot of readers I'm not sure notice that much. So you know, uh, this way, I feel like the sentences won't be as refined as I might like, but I'm getting more fiction out there, getting more ideas out there, and I'm hoping that people will engage with it. I'm hoping to hear people on it, and ultimately, if it's like a year of my life. Uh, the book that's going to come out in 2027, I spent like 7 years working on, and so spending a year on a writing project is that like to me it's not much time, and uh, so I'm just I don't know. Like I said, it's been fun so far.
Yeah. Well, in the back of your head is assuming, fingers crossed, you managed 52 stories in the year. Are you going to try to collect those? I mean, is this kind of a project where you like to kind of make it so that it's, people then can revisit it as either a book or ebook or whatever else, as opposed, or is it just going to live on the Substack, or is that kind of like it's way too early to even really tell at this point?
Yeah, I don't know yet. I I haven't talked to my agent or anybody about trying to make it a book. Like we talked about, a book of stories is hard to sell. So it may just live on the Substack, but or I mean, another thought I have is after the year is over, maybe I look back at these 52 stories and pick out a few that I think are particularly intriguing and expand those, or maybe there's one that wants to be a novel, or maybe there are a dozen or something that want to be more full length stories, and those become a collection. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know where it's going.
Yeah,
Um,
going back to in because we're coming up on time, so I just want to ask real quick. In the Electric Eden, this short story collection, I know it's been a long time, but when you put this collection together, Did you were the stories that, well, you know what? In retrospect, I guess you really only had one previously published story in here because oftentimes I kind of find that some writers, when they have a collection of stories that have been published elsewhere, they'll just put the stories in as they are, and other writers will kind of they'll revise them a little bit. You know, they might see, because again, it's one of those things too where I don't know about you, I hate going back to old works because I'm always going to see something that probably no other reader is going to even notice or care about. But for me, it's going to be like, that I really should not have put that comma there. Or like,
Yeah,
maybe instead I should have used this word. Like, is it
yeah,
one of those things too where it's difficult to kind of go back to your past work because you're going to see all the blemishes?
yeah. I mean, I always have that issue. It's like when I have a book come out, I end up with a version that I'm reading from that's marked up. And a lot of times what I'm reading is a little bit different from what's in the book because I've ended up revising those sentences. Because if I have to go back and go through them, I'm like, well, this could have been better. Um, and yeah, uh, so, but I mean, this kind of gets into another thing that's odd about the whole publishing process. Traditional publishing is um, when you've finished a book. So like the book that's going to come out next year um, is the is a sequel to Mad Boy, um, and which was my last book. That book came out in 2018. Um, I spent, like I said, about 6, 7 years working on this book that's a sequel to that, and um, and then I send it to my agent. My agent takes a while, and then he gets back. He says it's great. He's going to send it to the editor at Europa Editions who published Mad Boy. That editor takes a while, eventually gets back. He loves it. He wants to publish it. But that takes months. And then Europa's going to publish it. He says, normally we'd publish this in 26, but we have another book that has some similarities. Um, so we're going to push yours out to 27. Okay. So now between when I sold the book in the summer of 25 and when the book will come out in the spring of 27 is almost 2 years. And on a book that I'd already spent like 6, 7 years working on. So you're just so distant in a way from the person that wrote that book and finished that book, and then it's like the hint fiction piece. Like I can't remember it. You come back to it, and uh, there are things that could be better, and you're also a different person looking at it. It's kind of a strange experience.
Yeah.
I think of writing and reading in some ways as like a kind of telepathy, right? Like the author has created this object that allows the author's mind to connect with the reader's mind, and and it's really cool, right? Like I feel like as a reader, I have some idea of what it was like to be in Franz Kafka's head, right? It's amazing, and but so it's kind of weird as a writer when you've written some stuff and you come back to it some time later, you're kind of like in this telepathy state with the person you were. You're like reconnecting to the brain of the person you were some years ago, and you realize that you've changed. It's a really kind of a strange experience in a way. I feel like we don't talk about that enough.
No, no, that is fascinating. And we are up on the hour. I don't want to keep you too much longer. Obviously, you mentioned Mad Boy. This is the most recent book that you had a couple years ago. It's wild to me. Okay, so did you have a conversation with the editor when you were going to do a sequel? Because you're like, then you sent it to your agent, and then your agent sent it to the editor. Were you just writing a sequel on spec without the idea that they might even want it?
Yes. I
That's
did have
insane. I will just
it's
say.
pretty it is. It wasn't totally random. I did when we were doing the promotion around Mad Boy, I did have a conversation with the editor. I said, I'm thinking about a sequel to Mad Boy. Is it something you'd be interested in? He said, I'd love another book about Henry Phipps, the character in Mad Boy. And but there was no contract or anything. It easily could have gone sideways.
Wow.
But I uh, Mad Boy was the easiest book I've written. Like it only took me about 3 years to write, which for me is very fast for a novel. And it was part of the reason it was easy was the character of Henry Phipps, the boy in Mad Boy. I just loved him. I really felt a connection with him and enjoyed writing about him in a way I um, hadn't experienced with other books. And so when I finished it, it was the first book I had finished and thought to myself, I could see myself kind of continuing with this character and enjoying that.
Yeah.
And so the book that'll be out next year is it's a sequel set 20 years later with the same character. In
It's
Mad
called
Boy,
Matt.
he's
Is it called Matter Boy?
or Madman. Um, the the working title is The Passings, um, which to be honest I don't love. So we're gonna kick around some ideas and see if we can come up with a different title. But it's set on the Mississippi and Ohio rivers in the 1830s, and I think of it as a kind of a western. That was the Wild West of the time, and Henry Phipps has become a kind of enforcer on the river. Um, he's trying to get out of that life and gets dragged back into it by his past, things that have come back to him from his past. And most of the events take place on one day, and on that day, there happened to be a flock of passenger pigeons passing overhead. And the passenger pigeons were these birds that are extinct now, but used to flock in these huge flocks of billions of birds that would pass overhead for hours on end, darkening out the sky. And got fascinated by them, so they become an element of the story as well.
Very cool. Well, yeah, I definitely want to have you back so we can discuss in more depth just kind of the novel aspect, the three novels you published so far, plus the new one when it's out. And then also, how it's a sequel to Mad Boy. In the time remaining, though, just because again, I would say I I see you more as a short story writer than a novelist, if that's fair.
I love short stories. I'll put it that way.
So I'm assuming you've read Raymond Carver.
Oh, of course.
I never read Raymond Carver, and I ended up at some point acquiring the big Library of America collection of just basically all of his short stories, and because I'd always been aware of him, but some for some reason some writers I just never really get a chance to. So I've been kind of my goal is essentially try to like every night maybe like read one of his short stories because they're not very long. I mean, some are shorter than others basically throughout the next year, like, because again, like, the book is like 900 pages long. Um, I don't know. Just what are your thoughts on Raymond Carver? I'm only about like 100 pages in, so I've probably read like, maybe like, a dozen or so of a story so far. But I mean, I'm really enjoying it. They're very much like the slice of life type things where, like it's kind of hard to, I just haven't had a chance to discuss him with anybody yet. So that's why I
Yeah.
wanted to bring it up.
Yeah. When I did my MFA, which was 99 to 2001, yeah, he was hugely influential. There was, I mean, everybody was aware of him, and aware of his style. And if you weren't kind of influenced by him, you were trying not to be influenced by him. Um, and I remember an incident in our program where one of the visiting writers who was teaching a workshop, I just lost the light. Um, One of the visiting writers uh, came into the workshop, and I had two stories to talk about, one from from two different writers. And the first story she put up, she said, you know, this story is clearly just so derivative of Raymond Carver. Like, there's no point in talking about it. And and you know, it became like a huge scandal within the little MFA program at the time. But I was definitely influenced by Raymond Carver. Like he, I think what's appealing to him as a young writer is the way he writes looks deceptively simple.
Mm.
It looks like something you could do. Looks like that shouldn't be that hard. And
Yeah, he utilizes, at least in the stories I've read so far, he utilizes a lot of dialogue, which again, more white space on the page, which I feel is, as a reader, makes it a lot easier to read, as opposed to when you get to sometimes these short stories or it just, just blocks and blocks of paragraphs that just kind of slows down the rhythm a little bit.
yeah, it's been I reread a story of his recently. I'm trying to remember what it was and why. Um, and he uh one of the things that I enjoyed in that story was he kind of had a interesting way of bringing in an element, just one or two elements here or there that felt a little random or strange, almost dreamlike, but they were just kind of like squeezed in there. And I remember his best stories have really powerful endings. Maybe his most famous story is Cathedral. Have you come across that one yet?
It's later in that. Now, the way the collection's been set up, I think the very first, they basically collected, I think, three or four of his short story collection. So I'm still going through collection
Yeah.
one.
Okay.
I think Cathedral is like the third or fourth one in the omnibus.
Yeah. Well, that one's a just a terrific story. And it it just awakens your sense of humanity and um gives you a sense of awe. And his best stories can do that. And I mean, I also think about like I actually before I started reading any of his stories, I saw the movie Shortcuts by the famous director's name I can't remember. But you should watch after you finish the book. You should watch that because that movie um, takes several of his stories and kind of intercuts them together into an a rough narrative. I can't actually.
Hmm,
It's been so long since I saw it. I can't remember if it even tries to connect the stories or if um, uh, they're just separate episodes. But I think
interesting.
when I look, what's it? Robert Altman. That's the director's
Robert
name.
Altman. Yep.
And there's some good actors in there too.
Yeah. Jack Lemmon, Robert Downey Jr., Julianne Moore. Interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah. Good to know.
I forgot about Downey
Well,
Jr.
what's fascinating to me, at least, is that he never wrote a novel, or at least he never published a novel. Like he is
Right.
just short stories, which
Yeah.
typically you might have some writers like Flannery O'Connor, obviously is very well known for her short stories, but she wrote what, two novels, and Shirley
Mm.
Jackson obviously is really well known for The Lottery and short stories, but then she wrote but it's like he never published. I don't know. Again, I don't want to spend all the rest of the time talking about Raymond Carver, but it's
Yeah.
interesting that just short stories. And then like he
Yeah.
kind of built a career on that because you really can't do that nowadays.
Yeah. No, yeah, Alice Munro did that, and
Mm, yeah.
uh, I thought for a while that George Saunders was going to do that, but then he started putting out a couple novels.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I admired that about him. Yeah, I mean, as a person who loves short stories, yeah, it's hard to imagine someone doing that now. Although, I mean, I guess it's hard to imagine someone doing that now and achieving the level of uh, fame. I don't know if that's the right word for him, but I think you can put out short stories. You can spend your life putting out short stories still, but uh, you know, I think like Lucia Berlin did that, or maybe Lydia Davis, right?
Mm.
But they're not. anywhere close to household names. And
Yeah.
so, which is too bad. I mean, I do, coming back to the idea that it just seems like there's an opportunity in the culture now for, you know, it feels like short stories should be appealing to people. And if you could find the right way to connect people to short stories, maybe they would catch on. Um,
Yeah. Well, I don't want to keep you much longer, but I always try to end with if there's anything you've read recently, watched, listened to that you enjoyed, you would recommend.
yeah. Just the last thing I read was the director, oh, by a German author, whose name I'm going to have to Google. But it was, and I actually listened to it on an audiobook, but it was terrific. It's Daniel Kellman. Um,
Oh yeah.
it's about a German movie director in the beginning in the 1930s who, you know, getting away from Hitler, moved to Hollywood, directed a movie there that didn't go well, or what, you know, was a bust. And then also has an ailing mother in Austria. Ends up going back to try and help his mother, and then the war starts and he's not able to leave. And so it's about the compromises of trying to make art under a fascist regime, and
I can't
you know
imagine
has
that.
so has some unfortunate parallels to some aspects of our current situation. Um, and I thought it was fascinating. He is a terrific writer, great scenes, great has a really great ability to kind of seed things early in the book that, you know, come back in ways that grow and are startling later in the book, and it was well done.
Yeah. And if people want to find you, stalk you online, where's the best way they can do that?
I'm all over the usual social media, at Nick Arvin, and nickarvin.com is also probably the easiest way to find a starting point.
And if people want to find your Substack to sign up, and that's another thing too, with Substack, at least from what I can tell, like you don't even have the option for people to do like a paid tier, right? Like this is just a free Substack.
Yeah, yeah. So you can go to my Substack. If you go to nickarvin.com, you'll find a link to it, and you put your email in, and a short story every week by me will turn up in your email inbox. And yeah, you don't have to do anything. It's free. And you know, uh, my motivation, my hidden motivation, such as it is to build a mailing list in advance of my novel coming out next year, um, and really just to get fiction out to people, and love to hear back from people uh, on what they're thinking about the stories that are coming out.
Yeah. All right. Again, Nick, thank you so much for your time. We did go over, but there was a lot to discuss, and actually we could keep talking, but I don't want to keep you much longer.
Yeah,
But hopefully next year, when the sequel to Mad Boy comes out, we can definitely, chat then. So, yeah. So thanks again, Nick, and we'll see everybody next time.